Yep. Xander, thanks for joining me. It's been a while. It's great to see your face. I'm with you here with Zander Rafael, '07, and Kirkland House friend from way
Yeah,
back in the day. So
yeah,
it's good to see
yeah.
you.
We ran the marathon together at one point.
I just, for what it's worth, we don't want to diverge. I just ran my first official marathon since when ran it with you at 20.
Yeah, there
Um,
you go.
I
No,
ran a 3:09. I was pretty happy about that as a 40-year-old.
congratulations. That's a great time. I think
Thank you.
you beat your 20-year-old time for sure.
Probably.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, glad to be here. Glad to be talking about this. Uh, Maybe we can just start very simply because I know you, but the people we may send this to don't. Who are you? Tell me about you and what you're trying to do.
happy to. So Sam Lessin grew up in Englewood, New Jersey, Harvard '05, social studies. Was in Wig D and then Mather and Kirkland. And
Oh, wait. We share a dorm room freshman year. I was
Wig
in Wig
D.
D. Wig D 11.
That's why that I did not know that, and that actually is my room.
Literally, yes, I know.
Wow,
Because your name was listed. You get that piece of paper freshman year with all the people who have lived in your dorm room previously. Like waiting
that's
in my dorm
wild.
was a list of people.
That's
And your name was like two lines up. And then we met later in just around college. I was like, oh, you're
that
the guy
is
who lived in my room.
that is funny and statistically very unlikely. So that's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, yeah. Since then, look, I spent a few years at Bain and Company, built a company, sold it to Facebook. Was VP of product there, reported to Mark, and then built a venture firm. And so I'm a East Coast guy who's become a West Coast guy. I'd like to think I'm a little bit bi-coastal and speak both languages. That's who I am.
Great. And uh, just to cut to the chase, what are you running for? What are you doing? And
Yeah.
I'll ask it
So
again.
I'm
Why?
So look, I'm running a writing campaign to get on the ballot for the Harvard Board of Overseers and then hopefully get elected to the Harvard Board of Overseers. The way Harvard works, there's two governing bodies that really matter, and they date back to 1650. They're chartered by the 1650 charter. There's the corporation, which people are probably familiar with, right? That's the very small group of people. They elect their next, or they basically choose their successors, and they have a lot of power at the university. And then there's the overseers, which interestingly, if you look in the history, in recent years has been much more advisory. It's kind of framed as, hey, this is kind of the alumni board. They kind of help with academic review in different departments. But the reality is, by the 1650 charter, they actually have quite a bit of power, right? Both to kind of effectively help basically choose the president. They vote on whether they accept the presidential nomination, et cetera, as well as the succession of corporation members and other things like that. So that's the other major governing body. And that's the one that as alums, it's elected by alums, which is pretty tightly controlled year to year by HAA and the kind of official bodies. But the reality is like as an alum, it's really an election of all alums. And so, there's a way you can petition your way on and say, look, I'm not going to be the one selected by HAA as their official candidate, right? But you can still get on the ballot and get elected. And that's the path I'm choosing to take because I think it's really important to add some intellectual diversity to kind of the governing boards of Harvard in this moment. And candidly, I think Harvard needs help.
So let's talk about that. Clearly, you'd have to be under a rock to not have been reading about Harvard right now and the politics of the institution.
Yeah.
Maybe you can just speak to first why you think Harvard needs help.
Yeah. So look, I think, this fall has been incredibly disappointing in the history of Harvard. I've said a few times in different venues, I don't think the university's ever been weaker. You have what is literally the premier American education brand, potentially the global education brand, right? That has completely flubbed its response to 10-7, right? The academic mission and the safety of students is literally the first priority, right? And, you watch that slip. You had Claudine Gay come in and out is the shortest tenured president in the history of a 400-year-old institution, both because she flubbed that and then a bunch of other concerns about her credentials from an academic perspective. And you saw incredible weakness in the communication of all of that by the governing boards and the leadership, right? And so, what you've seen is a massive erosion of trust you've seen a massive erosion, I think, of brand equity and value. You saw an incredible decline in the number of students that are even applying to Harvard. We can get into why and things like that. And I think that what you've seen is that Harvard's a fabulously important and wonderful institution. I owe a lot to it. I love it. I think it matters, especially as we go into a wilder and wilder future, to have trusted brands, especially in the education space. But I think they've flubbed the response here in a few directions. And, really what we've seen, I think, this fall is much more symptom than cause. I think there's been a lot of things simmering about free speech on campus, about the culture of campus, about the priority of academics above all else for years, that we've kind of seen mentioned and written about in different things. But this was really a moment where things came to a head and things didn't go very well. And so my view is that this is the moment where alums that care, and I count myself among them, need to step up and lean in to add new perspective and new voice and kind of help the university forward.
Yeah. So can we talk about something you said there just a moment ago about this fall in applications?
Yeah.
You hear a lot about campus controversies, and I think many alum have had the feeling that uh, whatever controversies are happening at the end of the day, it's a fantastic institution, and the best and brightest will want to go there, and that will continue. And of course, there are scandals and whatnot. Every institution has them.
Yep.
Can we talk a bit? Can you just speak a bit more about how
Yeah.
students
Look, I mean, I'll give you.
voting with their
Look,
choice?
Yeah, totally. And look, I think the reality is you have to take a quantitative and qualitative look at this, right? And I actually think this is kind of a lagging indicator versus a leading indicator. But I'll tell you that, before the winter break, I was seeing another Harvard alum who's about 10 years older than me. And they have kids that are applying to college right now. And their children chose not to apply to Harvard. Right. And I had made a comment about how, Harvard, what a great school. It's something to the effect of what you just said. It's like, look, they have their controversies. People, he's like, Sam, you don't get it. It's like your version of Harvard and what it is not where it is anymore. And kids are smart kids who could get in, who are, potentially, who are, every bit capable. The ones who are academically minded, they say, I don't want to deal with the politics. I don't want to deal with the campus crap at Harvard, right? There's a lot of other fabulous institutions in the world. And I think that's kind of the reality where we sit. Now, look, is it still a fabulous institution? Yes. Right. Do I think that, there's every opportunity for Harvard in some ways to not let a crisis go to waste in the Rahm Emanuel world, right? And actually come back stronger from this if they make the right decisions and changes? Absolutely. I don't think it's the time to write off Harvard. But I do think that this isn't some abstract problem, right? This is a problem where you say, if your true north is to be the premier educational institution in the country, and candidly, if you have a brand as that, and what the tone you set trickles through all other universities and cultures, right? There's both a responsibility for yourself and I think for the broader environment to really, win, right, and to do the right stuff. And I think Harvard is not winning right now.
Yeah. Yeah. The one of the funny things watching from the outside at this point is that the controversy, the straw that broke the camel's back was the response to October 7th.
Yeah.
And a lot of the dialogue has been around that and the politics of that, which clearly are divisive and intense. But the students that are saying, I might not want to apply, it sounds like they're saying I might not want to apply for broader reasons than just this immediate political situation.
Yeah, look, I'm Jewish, and I think that the reality is juxtaposing the September 7th response to the George Floyd response, back to back, right? I think is really what you say, look, I think academic, neutrality makes a ton of sense, right? There are things where you could say, this makes sense. I think is the juxtaposition of these things, which I think was a real moment that picked up in the headlines and is sad and needs to be come back. But there is a deeper, broader set of problems. In some ways, that is the result of the problems. That is a symptom. That is not the cause, right? And the cause, I think, is the thing that's been driving the broader problems, whether it's the FIRE kind of surveys that have shown that Harvard is one of the least academically free speech cultures, in higher ed or in trusted higher ed, et cetera. That's kind of what's driving it. So I think the 10-7 response and beyond, especially juxtaposed with the George Floyd response, the inconsistency of the application of policy and how the administration, that's all I think has heightened it and made it more, it's impossible to not deny at this point. But I think the undercurrent, right, of Is this a culture that prioritizes academics first? Is this a culture of free inquiry? Is this a positive culture for debate and discussion? I think is really what's driving students to say, I don't want a part of this. Like, Harvard has become too political. It's not prioritizing the right things. I don't want to engage with that.
Right. Okay, so is there more to the problem?
There's a lot more to the problem. I mean, I think the reality is I'd say a few things. You know, it's been really interesting running this campaign over the last few weeks because I've had a lot of really great conversations, basically all off the record, with administrators and leaders across the organization. And I think the reality is there's a lot of great people that recognize this problem. Like, this is not like a lot of smart people inside don't see it. The interesting thing is that everyone has kind of slightly different takes on why and how to fix it, right? So there are people who say, look, Sam, this isn't about the corporation. This isn't about the students. This isn't about the faculty. This is about the administration, right? The administration blow and drift to just pull the university in a direction that we need to come back from. There are people that say, no, this is a governance structure problem, right? The corporations and being transparent enough, things like that. They'll say, hey, the president doesn't have enough power because the president, in some ways, like, doesn't have consolidated power for disciplinary action. So there's 1,000 diagnoses of like what's going on. And you can't solve them all at once, right? But I do think what you need, right, is someone like me, and that's why I'm standing forward and willing to put the work in, who can come in and say, look, let's fix the things we can quickly, right? Let's get the right speech policies. Let's get consistent enforcement going, right? Should Harvard look at what UChicago does in terms of, being an agnostic platform and being very clear about that? Probably. Chicago's done a great job with that, right? How do we kind of modernize a bunch of these things quickly? And then how do we kind of get governance back in the picture, right? I do think that the corporations done a terrible job communicating with the outside world. Outside stakeholders matter, right, to Harvard as much as they might pretend they don't. And I think being better at managing that, which, by the way, probably includes the overseers stepping up and taking a role that they haven't recently, but they have formally, right, which is actually being a legitimate check and balance on the corporation, which should strengthen the organization and strengthen Harvard. These are the types of tactical threads you start pulling on, right? And you kind of have to put a conscious effort in to do it. So I think you need new perspectives. You need people willing to do the work and push. And then it's not going to be a one-step solve, right? I think there's a bunch of things the organization has to do. Do the obvious stuff first, then you figure out kind of what you have to do from there.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've wondered myself is, there's this governance body, and clearly they have huge influence, and there are a huge body of faculty and a huge body of administrators and even a huge body of students who have certain views and have been acting on them. This is not totally a top-down dictate. This culture exists.
Yeah.
And how do you think about dealing with that?
I think there's a few things to keep in mind. Like, one is, again, this is from conversations I've been having and interactions. What I've seen is, ironically, the fact that there's so much fear about speech on campus really stilts the picture you see of some of these things, right? These things interact. And the fact that actually Harvard has such a bad recent history on free speech means there's a lot of faculty and students who are very aligned with this. They want to see Harvard, putting academics first. They want to see better free speech, but they're terrified, right? And so I think you do need the overseers, kind of the leaders to set an example and put some policies in place that help these people speak up more freely beyond Steven Pinker, right, who has enough personal gravitas and whatever that he can say. But a lot of people are running scared. And so I think the first thing to do is kind of make this not a one-story side thing, because people actually can speak up. And I think you can make a big difference there. The second is like, look, one of the
place such that people can speak their actual mind. And you believe reasonably, I think, that many people would want to if they felt safe to.
Exactly. And it is these voices, I think, who care first about academics and free speech and some of these other opinions versus what's coming out, who ironically are the ones, right, who are not speaking up, right? And I think there's a very large number of them, right, from everything I've seen and can over running this campaign and before. So I think we have to fix that. The second thing is, I think there's this interesting, and it's hard to talk about too much publicly because it's nuanced, right? But free speech means free speech in the academic context and for academic pursuits, right? It does not mean, right, that you have the right to disrupt freshmen who want to study, for exams in the yard before their exams. Like that, Harvard's true north is free inquiry and the academic side. And so being able to say to the students and faculty that if you want to protest and be loud, go to Boston Common. Like you're an American. That's the space for it. But Harvard is private property with an academic mission, right? And so there's this interesting thing, which is I think to get it right, you kind of have to do that. And by the way, some people are going to be mad about that. The reality is that Harvard, because it's such a great brand, is quite a prize, right? When it comes to being able to leverage things. So being able to say, I'm a Harvard student, or this is a Harvard club, and we believe this extreme view and leverage the Harvard brand for your politics as a point of leverage, or a faculty saying, this is my point of leverage in the world, is taking this Harvard brand, which I do not own, right, and manipulating it for political ends, right? We have to kind of put an end to that and say, on your time in the Boston Common, you do what you want, but you can't. The Harvard brand is an academic brand, and the freedoms you're extended are for academics.
Yeah. Noting the time. Well, look, noting the time. If someone wants to help you and someone wants to affect the changes you're talking about, what needs to happen, and why does it, how important is an individual action in this one?
Look, it's very important. The reality is it's actually pretty straightforward, which is if you believe these principles broadly and believe I can help support them, go to samforoverseer.com, right? And there are directions there on how to nominate me formally for the ballot, to get on the ballot for the overseers. There's then an actual election that takes place for overseers this spring. The irony is that you need 3,300 nominations in order to get on the ballot, and about 30,000 people tend to vote in these things from a lump perspective. So the bar is very high. I think we can get there with the right people kind of stepping up and doing it. Your vote matters, right? But I need 1% of Harvard alums effectively to get me on the ballot, and then about 10% to actually get me elected. I think getting on the ballot's the hard part. So if you're up for it, go nominate me. This is your right as a Harvard alum, and candidly, your responsibility, I would argue, if you do say so, right? If you care about these types of things, and then share the message, because this is a big number, but it's a doable number to make it happen.
Yeah, and you're already well on your way.
I am. I think this is a thing that can be done, but it does require people to say who care about this to go after it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the time and talking about it.
Zander, thank you.
Always fun.
I appreciate you sharing it. Thank you.